Just last night, I was lost in the jungle with Pitfall Harry, surrounded by giant scorpions and man-eating crocodiles.
Game collecting can be a very expensive hobby. Heaven help those going for complete sets. The prices for Atari 2600 games, though, in my experience, were always much more reasonable than those of many of the other systems. While it does seem that the prices for 2600 games are at least slightly on the rise, there are still a plethora of good games that can be picked up for less than $5. But what does it look like on the other side of the spectrum? How much are you going to pay if you're aiming to complete that official release set? As with the other top 10 most expensive game videos, we are just looking at games that were officially released for mass consumption and not including more expensive variants. So we won't be covering Lockjaw, the game Apollo was forced to change the name of because it was too similar to the Jaws film, because you can get that game under the name Shark Attack for much less. Still kind of expensive, but for less. If you want more information about Lockjaw, make sure you check out my Apollo game ranking. We also won't be covering Karate. Thank God. Because that was re-released by Froggo and can be found for $10 as opposed to $700. And if you want more information on that abomination, make sure to check out the episode of Just the Worst where we cover Karate. There will also be no limited special releases such as Pepsi Invaders or Atlantis 2, even though I find these games to be very interesting and I would definitely like to cover them one day. With all of that said and done, let's see if there are any hidden gems at the very upper echelon of expensive VCS titles. This is the top 10 most expensive games for the Atari 2600. Number 10. The Music Machine was published in 1983 by a company called Sparrow. I researched these games in order from 10 to 1, and the Music Machine was a doozy to start with. Not because it's a terribly great game, but because it opened my eyes to the existence of the Music Machine-iverse. Turns out, there's not just this Atari game, but numerous music albums, books, and cartoons. This game was only sold at Christian bookstores, and it doesn't seem that very many of them were produced. The game, as with the other media in the Machine-iverse, takes place in Agape Land, a fictional land of love. Aww. The heroes of the game are Stevie and Nancy, who are tasked with catching items in a basket that are being thrown by this shady son of a bitch, Mr. Pims. The items are various objects related to Christian themes and messages, such as a heart representing love, a lamb representing gentleness, and a mustard seed representing faith. Shout out to my friend Kate, who taught me about mustard seeds. Mr. Pims will also throw out these creatures called Pudgeons in an effort to try and break your basket. I really love the name Pudgeons for these creatures. I gotta get a pug and name him Pudgeons, I think. That's the plan. The Music Machine is basically a Kaboom clone played with the paddle controllers with a few interesting twists on the gameplay, such as having to avoid the Pudgeons and the fact that the hearts are the only object that you absolutely have to catch in order to not lose a basket. I actually quite like this one. The graphics are fine for what they are, with everything being more or less recognizable, and I enjoy this genre of catching falling objects games, whatever you call it. The biggest hindrance to the experience is how choppy everything is. It's not too bad in the first couple of rounds, but it is very distracting and annoying when everything speeds up, and especially after you've been playing for a while. When all is said and done, I am very glad that I discovered this one. I find the Machine-iverse intriguing, and I've listened to some of the music and watched some of the animations while preparing for this script, and it is not bad for Christian-themed entertainment targeted at children. One of the cartoons even featured the voice of heavy metal legend Pat Boone! While $350 for a Kaboom clone that doesn't quite reach the level of Apollo's Lost Luggage is hard for me to justify, this is one that I would love to pick up if I ever find it for a decent price. And you better believe that I will be on the lookout for the associated albums and other media related to the franchise. Out of Control was published in 1983 by Avalon Hill. The game has you taking control, hopefully, of a spaceship tasked with trying to fly past space buoys in proper sequence. After completing the course, you are then tasked with popping 10 space balloons and finally docking your ship to end the game. I'm going to be frank here, and I might even be frank over there. This is not my type of game. I didn't have very much fun with this one. I found it to be very frustrating. I had trouble getting used to controlling my ship, and if you hit a buoy, you were penalized and have to repeat the last set of buoys. And this just got really old. Docking really confused me at first because I thought I had to line up and get my ship all the way in, but it turns out you just have to get into the middle to complete the stage. It took me way too long to do this the very first time I tried. There are several different courses with an increasing number of buoys, but I did not spend very much time with this one. I just was not having fun and was not compelled to keep playing. I'm sure there are people that would be really into this, but it is just not for me, and certainly, in my opinion, not worth the $370 for a loose cart. Number 8. Manja was published in 1983 by Spectravision. This game really spoke to me as someone that is descended from Sicilian immigrants. As you may or may not know, gorging ourselves on pasta is the equivalent of baseball in the US. The game has you taking control of an Italian boy that is forced to eat a copious amount of pasta in order not to hurt your mama's feelings. If you eat too much, though, your stomach will literally explode, a la Mr. Creosote. Luckily for you, you are aided by your Sicilian pets, Sergio the dog and Frankie the cat that will eat a plate of pasta if you throw it at them. Be careful though, if Mama sees you give the animals food or if you miss them, she will bring you 3 times as many plates on the next trip. The game is controlled using only the joystick, the different directions completing different actions. It really boils down to a juggling act, where you are trying to not eat too much food and explode, but also trying to make sure that too much pasta doesn't pile up on the table, causing it to break. I found this one incredibly charming from the first moment I looked into it. The cover art with the guy feeding the dog the gabagool.
A slice of gabagool.
The text on the instructions with the words, "Eat, eat, manja, manja. Come on, it's good for you, huh?" Heck, there's even a picture of Mario on the wall. I just love the concept of this game. The graphics are actually quite nice, with everything being recognizable with some decent animation. There's some music during the intro, which sounds alright, but the sound effects during gameplay is pretty grating on the ear. I did have fun with this one and spent a lot of time with it, but it does get a bit tiresome after an extended gameplay session. The execution of the mechanics does fall a little flat and wears out its welcome. But even with that, I think it's a good game, and I will be coming back to this one for a short burst of pasta-eating madness. I don't think I would pay $380 for a loose cart, but this is another game that I would love to have in the collection if I could ever find it for a reasonable price. Texas Chainsaw Massacre was published in 1983 by Wizard Video Games. This is a game that I have a lot of history with, being one that I always play around Halloween time. I also covered the prototype for this game in my unreleased Atari 2600 games video. The game is one of the first horror-themed video games and finds you taking control of lovable elf Leatherface on a mission to murder tourists that are trespassing on your land. They have it coming. They're trespassing. You are armed with your iconic chainsaw and have to dodge items in your way, including cow skulls, fences, and wheelchairs, which is an interesting choice for a movie reference. Your chainsaw uses fuel constantly and uses more when you rev it up to cut an enemy down. You need to kill as many people as you can before your 3 tanks of gas run out. Now I need to be very clear here. This is not a very good game. Regardless of how many times I have played this over the years, I still can't get a good feel for slaughtering innocents. Most of the time I will rev up my chainsaw and move in to cut up a tourist, and they will just keep respawning to the other side of me until I am finally able to get them. I just can never get the hang of executing the murder consistently. The obstacles in your way get pretty annoying as well. Constantly running into a fence and having to freeze up every few seconds is not exactly the most compelling gameplay in my humble opinion. There's also an air-piercing high tone that keeps playing, serving as the scream of the girl you are currently chasing. It's kind of cute the first time it happens, but very quickly makes you want to turn the volume all the way down. But there are some positives. I don't think the graphics are bad for what they are. I think Leatherface looks Leatherfacey enough. I love the fact that there's an Atari 2600 game where your goal is to slaughter innocent people. That's awesome! The title screen is very evocative of the source material as well. But one of the main reasons that I have a fondness for this game, besides simply being a fan of the source material, is the fact that it was released by a company founded by B-movie icon Charles Band. Wizard Video Games was a subsidiary of Empire International Pictures, Band studio at the time that brought us such classics as Ghoulies, Reanimator, and Dolls. Texas Chainsaw Massacre has an interesting place in not only video game history, but the horror film culture in more ways than is immediately recognized. So I like it, whether or not it's a great experience. $400 for a loose cart is a lot, and I assume would be a bad investment for most people looking for a good game to play. I would absolutely love to have this one on display though, and I would be very tempted. Halloween was published in 1983 and is the other game released by Wizard Video Games, the Charles Band company that released Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The game tasks you with taking control of a babysitter, presumably Laurie Strode, trying to save children from Michael Myers or to stab him in the face in order to score points. Overall, this is a much better game than Texas Chainsaw, and is actually pretty fun. I think so, at least. There's a very sweet 2600 rendition of the Halloween theme music that starts off the game and plays whenever Michael is in the room. I think the graphics work just fine, and the gameplay mechanics are pretty well implemented, if a little clunky. The biggest surprise to me about this game is the brutal gore. This game is way gorier than the film. Michael slices your head off, blood spurting everywhere when he catches you, and he will viciously maim children that get in his path, again complete with spurting blood. It is pretty amazingly violent for a game of the era, which I understand contributed to its low sales, as well as Texas Chainsaw Massacre's. Obviously, I share similar feelings to this game as I do the previous one for the same reasons, but this game is actually even pretty good to boot. If you're looking for a good Atari 2600 game to play around the Halloween season, this will fit that bill. As for paying the $550 that this game goes for, that's definitely too much, but again, I would be tempted. Number 5. Malachi was published in 1983 by Answer Software. It is a maze game that has you taking control of Harrington Harry Cragg, commander of the starship Endless Search. Harry has landed on the starbase Malachi and is being held captive by the Malachi. They apparently want to steal your advanced technology, something like that. Harry has to steal a key from each of the Malachi in the order at the top of the screen. After getting a key, you have to hurry up to the airlock at the top of the screen and unlock a door. If you capture a Malachi in the wrong order or take too long, they get pissed off and get aggressive until you return to your compartment. If you get all 3 keys, you move on to the next level and repeat the process. This is one of those games that when I first started it up, I was very confused as to my objective. I could not understand what I was supposed to do initially. After reading the manual, I honestly didn't think I would like this one very much, as the gameplay sounded too tedious. But luckily, I was incorrect, and Malagai is a pretty good variation on the maze game genre. It is a very tense game that had me squeezing my joystick very tightly as I attempted to avoid the Malagai and unlock the layer of airlock. My hands hurt after an extended gameplay session of Malagai. This is one that I'm going to come back to for sure, and it is a shame that a loose copy of this goes for $610, because it is a pretty enjoyable experience, complete with that good Atari lore. Number 4. River Patrol was published in 1984 by Tiger Vision. It is based on an arcade game that I had never heard of that was released in 1981 by Orca Corporation. In River Patrol, you take control of a captain of a boat that is trying to make it upriver while saving drowning people. While making your way up the river, your boat is slowly taking on water and you need to avoid rocks, dynamite, whirlpools, and alligators in order to not sink. You accelerate with the action button and steer with the joystick. There is music that plays during the game that is pretty decent by Atari 2600 standards. The graphics aren't bad, but the scrolling is very choppy and made me feel a little dizzy after playing for a long period of time. This is a good game though that kept me engaged for quite a while. It was very rewarding to reach the end of the river after a series of close calls with obstacles on your way through the level. I am definitely going to make a point to play the original arcade game because I really enjoyed this 2600 conversion. I would never pay $790 for a cartridge of River Patrol, but I will load this ROM up in the future for sure. The magic number 3. 3. Eli's Ladder was published in 1982 by Simage. It might be Simage, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. I could not find a lot of information about this game. It is an educational game that has you doing math problems. These math problems need to be solved so that Eli, your little alien friend, can climb a space ladder in order to make it to his ship, because that adds up. It apparently came with a wall chart and stickers. The game utilizes both joysticks, with one being controlled by the parent and the other being controlled by the child and used to answer the problems. I just don't have a lot to say here. There's not a lot of information. I really do appreciate the odd Atari lore, but I am more of a Donkey Kong Jr. math kind of guy myself. $1,800 for a copy of this game is insanity, and I find it baffling that anyone would spend that much on an old educational game. Number 2. Red Sea Crossing was published in 1983 by Inspirational Video Concepts. Like number 10, The Music Machine, this is another religious game, and from what I read was a very controversial game in the 2600 community, when a cartridge for Red Sea Crossing was discovered in a rummage sale in 2007. The veracity of the cartridge was disputed until an advertisement for the game from 1983 resurfaced in the year 2011. This is one of the rarest published video games in existence. The game has you take control of Moses after parting the Red Sea, guiding him through the parted waters while avoiding seaweed, serpents, and Egyptians, among other obstacles. You use the joystick to move Moses, and the action button makes him jump. There's a fish on the top of the screen that functions as the timer. There are items scattered throughout the screens that allow you to gain extra points, such as doves or stone tablets. There was no instruction manual included with the game, but instead a coloring book and an explanatory audio cassette. It is not a very good game. The programmer was Steve Shustak, who was self-taught and worked independently. It's a fun novelty for a few minutes, but it gets boring rather quickly. I kind of like the graphics, and I think that Mr. Shoestack did a pretty good job with the presentation overall. It just isn't very compelling mechanically and is a pretty clunky, uninteresting experience. This is one of those instances where the backstory of the game overshadows the game itself by far. $2,000 for a Christian game from 1983 is a bit steep for me, but I am happy that I now know of another title I can include in a future religious game-themed video. Probably something I'll release around Christmas. Fascinating indeed. Number one. Air Raid was published in 1982 by Menavision, another game that had an extremely low number of copies produced. The game has you controlling a ship that is tasked with trying to protect buildings from the enemy's bombs. This game cartridge has a unique blue T-handle design, and a complete copy of this game has gone for $33,000 because people are crazy. This is not the worst game that I played for this list, but it is definitely not anything special and kind of lacking. I think the graphics are pretty bland and the gameplay really isn't anything to write home about. The hit detection is awful, and it was impossible for me to tell if one of my hits would land or not. It just was not consistent at all. And it's just not a very compelling experience. I do like the addition of the buildings that you need to protect. In theory, that sounds like it would add a new dimension to the gameplay, but it just wasn't very well executed. I got bored with this one pretty quickly. Obviously, bad game or not, I would love to own it, but $6,000 for a loose copy is madness. I don't know if I will ever play much more of this one in the future, but I am glad that I finally checked out this elusive game for myself. It has an interesting history and lineage in the collector scene, but I can't imagine that anyone is seeking this one out because they adore its gameplay. And there we go. The top 10 most expensive games for the Atari 2600. Let me know what you think of the games. Do you own any of them? Have you ever played any of them? There are several of these that I would absolutely love to own, but those asking prices are just a little too wild for me. Make sure to check out the other top 10 most expensive games videos that I've made for other consoles. There are a lot of fun, interesting games in these lists. And there we go, that's the video. I want to thank everyone for watching. I hope you have a beautiful day, and I will see you next time. Bye. A gabagool! A gabagool! A gabagool! A gabagoo! A gabagoo! A gabagoo! A gabagoo! A gabagoo! A gabagoo!